In the New Mexico Territory, in 1878, one could take a life, a liberty, and a home without firing a single bullet. Everything in the West was decided by one ruthless weapon: paperwork and debts. Silas Crow thought he was buying a docile lamb to legitimize his robbery of the valley's only source of livelihood, but he was wrong. The one being used as collateral was the only one who knew how to read his fraudulent numbers. Leaving behind the decaying civilized world, Nora plunged into a land not found on any map. The man who pulled her from the clutches of death was Mateo. But this man wasn't there to rob or show off his power. He was there because his people were dying of thirst. Mateo, speaking hesitant but firm English, "Your men intend to seize this water source with paper or with guns." Surviving the flood was only the beginning. Now, to prevent a massacre, the one holding her life in his hands and the woman most hunted in the territory will have to bet their lives on each other, or they will destroy each other. This isn't a den of barbarians. This is Mateo's family. They legally live within the boundaries of the reserve, but a devastating drought forced them to this outlying area in search of water. Now, even that faint hope is being crushed. Contractor Silas Crow's cattle have swarmed in, trampling and muddying their last remaining source of sustenance. Nora, Silas Crow is lying. The real boundary doesn't go through the stream. He secretly moved the surveying stakes 2 miles west. He's creating a fake map, distorting the landscape so that the Black Mesa stream is nestled within the public land he just applied for. Mateo's entire life had been a battle against guns and wild beasts. But in this very moment, he realized the frail white woman before him could read the most deadly weapon his people couldn't defend against: pieces of paper. Nora, the army only believes these papers. Let me go. I must go to Fort Stanton and report the truth before he brings his troops to steal the water. Mateo, outside, Crow's gunmen are scouring the canyons. If you step out of here, you will die. You must stay. Nora, my father used debt to bind me. Silas Crow used the law. And you used safety. Nora, listen carefully, Mateo. A cage is still a cage, even if the person holding the key says he locked it to protect me. Although Mateo didn't resort to violence, his overprotective nature inadvertently reopened Nora's deepest wound, the deprivation of her right to self-determination. A whisper, Mescalero woman. The cavalry are preparing to bring the barbed wire to the stream. Crow has stuffed their pockets with money. When the moon rises tomorrow night, I can show you a shortcut to the fortress. The door to freedom had opened in the darkness, but to pass through it, Nora would have to make a fateful choice: flee to reclaim her legal status, or stay to share the risk with those who had just saved her life. In this barren frontier, trust is not given with promises. It must be earned with sweat and survival skills. They exchanged weapons for survival in each other's world. Mateo taught her how to read the language of the land to deter enemies. And Nora, she taught him how to decipher the treacherous language on the parchment. Love in the West doesn't blossom from sweet words. It's measured by sacrificing every drop of life. The icy barrier in Nora's heart shattered. She suddenly understood that this man wasn't holding her back out of the pride of a controlling man. He was depriving himself of water to keep a child alive who might not survive this drought. Nora's presence was a ticking time bomb. Some in the camp wanted to tie her up and hand her over to the cavalry in exchange for peace. Mateo used his honor to stop them, but Rosa understood that if they continued to force the issue, they would be no different from Silas Crow. Rosa, her hoarse voice echoing in the night. "The Eastern Trail is deserted. You can go now." A heavy silence fell. Nora looked at the path to freedom stretching before her. Then she looked back at the tattered papers on the stone slab. For the first time in her life, she stood before a decision not dictated by debt, law, or threats. Nora, holding her head firmly, "I need 2 more days to copy this entire fraudulent map." Nora's choice offered a fragile glimmer of hope, but it was immediately put to the test. There were some in the camp who refused to risk their families' lives for a white man. "Woman, the moon will rise tonight. I can show you a shortcut to the military fort." The door to her old world had swung open, a path to reclaiming her legitimate status, taking revenge on Silas, and reclaiming her mother's farm. A perfect opportunity. Nora thought she was stepping toward freedom, but in reality, she was stepping onto the brink of death. The army was using Silas's fraudulent map to hunt down the camp, and right before her eyes, the nephew Mateo was willing to sacrifice his life to protect, was about to become their first target. Hiding in the shadows, she would reach the fortress, recover her property and her life. But if she stepped out from behind this rock, she would lose everything and forever become an accomplice to the hunted. The chance to reclaim her freedom, status, and her mother's farm was galloping north on the horse she had just driven away. Nora had not chosen the path of becoming a privileged white woman. She chose to lie in the mud, shielding a child with Mescalero blood with her own body. She had lost her shoes, her means of escape. But when Nora entered the camp that morning, no one looked at her as an outsider bringing misfortune. Rosa stepped forward. There were no sentimental words of thanks. She decisively tore a piece of cloth from her own dress, knelt down, and wiped the wound. In that moment, Nora was no longer a prisoner. She was the one who had bled for them. "Nora," her voice trembling but firm, "Lieutenant Clay Ward, the commanding officer of last night's patrol. He's the one who forged this document." A chill ran down her spine. The army hadn't been deceived by Silas Crow. They were accomplices. Their enemy wasn't just a greedy contractor, but an entire system of power willing to bend the law for lucrative contracts. Mateo was the embodiment of the wilderness. He believed in speed, darkness, and bloody revenge. But Nora knew that a single gunshot now would be the death sentence for the entire camp. "Nora, no! If you cut the fence and kill the cattle, Ward will call you barbarians destroying property. Fort Stanton will have the perfect excuse to massacre all the women and children." A clash between two methods of survival. One side is the law of the jungle, the other is the law. But both are willing to die to protect what they believe in. The love of the West isn't sworn in a church. It's proven when you're willing to let tree roots tear through your flesh, as long as you don't let go of the other person and fall into the abyss. Nora, you can come with me or you can watch me go. But Mateo, you can't decide for me. For the first time, Mateo understood. This woman didn't need a protector. She needed a companion. Mateo, the bearer, must choose their own path. No diamond rings or gold bracelets. The knife was the pledge of survival. Absolute respect for the self-determination of the one they loved. But in New Mexico territory, freedom always comes with a bloody price, and that price has come knocking. Lieutenant Ward wasn't a bloodthirsty monster. He was a perfect cog in the greedy machine of the West. He didn't need slaughter. He just needed results to secure lucrative supply contracts. Clay Ward, Nora Bell, just step over here and sign this document confirming that you were kidnapped against your will. In return, I will grant them 3 days of truce to retreat deeper into the mountains. No bloodshed. Everything will be legal. A perfect deal. The safety of an entire community is valued by a lie. Mateo, live. A man's cruelest choice isn't to die for the woman he loves. The cruelest choice is to stand still and watch her walk toward the enemy to protect his family. Mateo chose the community, and so did Nora. The civilized world greeted her with restrictive clothing and pitying glances. They said her decision to protect the Mescalero people was just a hallucination caused by her fear of being kidnapped. But they didn't know that Nora hadn't entered this fortress to weep and beg for mercy. She hadn't returned to be a victim. She had returned to find weapons. Amidst the piles of files, Nora found the weapon she needed. The original surveying documents proving Silas Crow's fraud. But with it came a truth that froze her blood. The operational order stated there would be no 3-day truce. Tomorrow morning, as the Mescalero community moved slowly, burdened with the elderly and children, the army would march into the valley, cut off the water supply, and completely destroy the entire camp. To expose the crime and save dozens of innocent lives, Nora had to get the fraudulent documents out. But the price of salvation was never cheap. To sever all legal ties that allowed Silas to claim the stream, she had only one choice. Nora had personally burned her own past and her own interests. She stepped into the darkness, no longer a white citizen, with no home to return to. Only one goal remained: to race against death before dawn. Nora didn't sit weeping and waiting for her man to rescue her. She used her job as a record keeper to memorize the changing of the guard schedule and the fort's map. With the original surveying documents tucked into her bosom, she cast aside the chance of returning to the comfortable world of white people. She plunged into the storm, gambling her own life to rectify the injustices of those in power. Meanwhile, Mateo also didn't believe in miracles or the mercy of the army. When he noticed the unusual activity of Silas Crow's henchmen, he knew the 3-day ceasefire was just a trap. Mateo didn't choose a suicidal war. His goal wasn't revenge with guns, but to save the lives of his people and protect the water source with the wisdom of a seasoned survivor. Mateo, his voice hoarse, seeing through her. "You came back for the stream?" Nora, stroking back her wet hair, her eyes resolute. "For all those who need it." They realized the other hadn't given up on them. Nora joins the army to buy time and steal weapons. Mateo lets go of her to save the community. Their understanding transcends language barriers, bound together by a single plan: to stop greed. Nora, Lieutenant Ward, I have the original survey records from the territorial office in my possession. If you take another step to steal this water source for Silas Crow, I swear I'll take this paper to the court in Santa Fe. Nora, you'll be stripped of your rank and brought before a military court for complicity and fraud. The stern threat struck like a sledgehammer. In the presence of both soldiers and civilian cattle herders, Lieutenant Ward froze. He realized the paper in the woman's hand was the final verdict. Silas Crow had intended to use the strength of his cattle to destroy the water source before the authorities could intervene. But he forgot that in the West, water doesn't belong to the strongest. Water belongs to nature. Mateo, shouting through the thunder, "Cut the fence!" They saved each other in the same moment of destruction. The engagement knife wasn't meant to take lives, but to sever the shackles of death. On the edge of the cliff, Lieutenant Ward silently raised his hand. The cavalry turned and retreated, leaving Silas Crow to collapse in the mud, screaming in despair as his empire was crushed by nature. Mateo, in a low, questioning tone, "Now that you have this document, will you take it to court to reclaim your mother's farm?" Mateo's question was light, but carried the weight of a life-changing turning point. Nora had lost the inheritance papers, but she now held the evidence to blackmail Silas. She could return to the white world as a hero. Survival was over, but now, for the first time in her life, Nora Bell truly had more than one path to choose from, and the West awaited her answer. In the West, victory was never permanent. The legal battle over the border would continue. To protect the water, both had paid the price for their choices. Mateo lost his position as leader of the hunting party for repeatedly gambling the community's lives on a white man. Nora, she permanently lost the papers needed to reclaim her mother's ranch. But in return, the children had water to drink, and Silas Crow no longer wielded absolute power. Rosa didn't call Nora a Mescalero. She didn't erase her origins, nor did she romanticize her transformation into someone else. She simply gave Nora the right to keep the ranch's water and food ration book. In the harsh frontier, the greatest recognition lies not in words, but in entrusting the lives of an entire community to someone who was once a stranger. Mateo, I'll pitch my tent here, and you can go wherever you choose. No begging, no clinging, no coercion. Mateo gave the woman he loved what she had been deprived of her entire life, the space to decide her own destiny. Before, two men had used a piece of paper to decide where she would live and to whom she would belong. Today, she would hammer her own stake for survival. Nora, so let's start here. Their love was fulfilled not by a grand wedding, but by a shared act of labor and a future they both willingly chose. Nora's voice rang out, soft but carrying the weight of a declaration. At the beginning of the dry season, Silas Crow once said he would take the stream and me. Nora, looking straight ahead, embracing the west wind. But he was wrong. The water doesn't belong to the strongest, and neither do I. Thank you for accompanying Nora and Mateo to the end of their journey. In the Wild West, a true home and genuine love are always the rewards for those who dare to fight for freedom. If this story touches your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. There are still many unfinished journeys on the brink of life and death waiting to be told. See you in the next stories.